They say children don't understand the world, but how do you explain a child who learns to survive before even learning how to read? This story has no heroes and capes, no predictable endings. It has cold, hunger, fear, and a coin. A single coin that, in the hands of an 8-year-old boy, became the last line between love and despair. What if I told you God answered that prayer in a way no one expected? That, between abandonment and faith, life still made space for a miracle, simple, quiet, but real? If you think miracles only happen to those who have a lot, this story will challenge everything you believe. Because when hunger strikes and the world turns its back, that's when faith and love show their true strength. And today, you'll find out how a child's last coin carried more hope than any vault full of riches. The wind cut through the narrow alleys, carrying the bitter smell of old things and poorly burned wood. In a corner no one looked at anymore, where life seemed to have forgotten the pavement, Noah, only 8 years old, curled up on the ground, knees pulled in, holding his little sister Isla, 3, close to his chest. His frail body could barely hold itself up, but he insisted on protecting her, like that was the only thing left that mattered. The cold was brutal, but the love he had for her was even more stubborn. It had been months since their mom had left, in the quietest, most unfair way. An unnamed illness that came slowly but took everything fast, including any sense of stability. Their dad, who used to say "I'll fix this," went out to look for work and never came back. Disappeared. Noah didn't know if he'd run away, given up, or just got lost in himself. Even so, he still kept a kind of faith deep inside that no one really understood. That simple kind of faith born from listening, to a verse heard once, to a prayer whispered by his mom, to a quiet "God sees everything" said in the middle of a storm. In that forgotten corner, time felt frozen. Only the wind and the growl of an empty stomach reminded them that life was still beating. Noah pulled Isla closer, like trying to hide the world from her. His eyes were closed, not in sleep, but in resistance. He imagined a different reality, where a child could just be a child, without having to think about hunger, the streets, or loss. A place where siblings could play instead of protecting each other from the cold. Where love was louder than abandonment. And clinging to that nearly invisible hope, he refused to give up. When the sun finally disappeared and the night took over with its cutting wind, Noah's stomach ached again, a pain that wasn't just physical, but reached all the way to the soul. He slipped his hand into the pocket of his worn-out coat and found what was left, a single coin. Cold. Small. But it felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Not enough to buy a meal, not even a decent snack, but in that moment, it was all he had. And even without knowing exactly what to do with it, he knew who he'd do it for. Isla woke up crying softly, her lips cracked and her voice nearly gone. "I'm hungry, Noah," she whispered, clutching his coat with her cold little hands. His heart clenched in a way only those who've cared for someone hungry can understand. He knew he needed food too. He could feel his body giving up. But in that moment, love spoke louder. "I'm going to get something, okay? Stay right here by this wall. The wind doesn't hit as hard," he said, covering her with his own coat and hurrying into the street, holding onto the faith that God hadn't closed all doors just yet. The bakery still had its lights on. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, almost like a cruel joke. Noah stepped in quietly, placed the coin on the counter, and looked at the clerk with eyes that said more than 1,000 words. The man, without saying a thing, took the coin and handed him a piece of dry bread from the day before. He whispered a thank you, hands trembling as he held the bread. He ran back to Isla, broke the bread in half, and handed it to her with a smile that hid everything he was feeling. When she offered a piece back, he shook his head. "You first, sis. I'm okay." That wasn't strength. That was love. That was faith in action. Night had swallowed the whole city when Noah returned to his sister. Isla was still awake, holding the bread in both hands like it was a treasure. She ate slowly, savoring each crumb like it might be the last. And maybe it was. Noah, even with an empty stomach, smiled at her, hiding his pain behind a fake sense of peace. He didn't say a word, but inside, he prayed. Not with fancy words, but with that kind of prayer only hunger can teach, a silent conversation with God, somewhere between faith and exhaustion. Then he heard a sound. A soft rustle, barely audible. He looked to the side and saw a silhouette near a lamppost. It was a woman, wrapped in a thick shawl, eyes that looked like they understood exactly what he was going through. She didn't speak at first. Just watched. And in her gaze was a mix of compassion and sorrow that no one could fake. After a few seconds, she stepped forward, pulled a small bag of food from her hands, and held it out. "Here, child. This is for you. You'll need it more than I do," she said with a calm, firm, but gentle voice. Noah froze. Pride and desperation wrestled inside him. That help was a blessing, but accepting it felt like admitting he couldn't do it alone. Isla, unaware of that inner battle, reached out slowly. She took the bag in her little hands and looked at the woman with gratitude. The woman smiled with her eyes, gave a small nod, and disappeared into the dark street. Noah stood still for a few seconds, tears burning in his eyes. It felt like God had remembered them. Like someone, somewhere, still saw two siblings the world had forgotten. While Isla slept, her belly a little less empty and her face resting in her brother's lap, Noah just sat there in silence. The bag of food was beside him, untouched. He just stared into nothing, like trying to find answers in the dark. The memory of his mom came like a warm breeze on a cold night. She always said, with that soft voice, that God never abandons the little ones. And he believed it, even if that faith now felt fragile, almost invisible. Her image with the Bible on her lap, reading verses out loud before bed, still lived strong in his memory. But the longing hurt. It hurt a lot. Especially when his mind replayed that last day, the way she tried to smile even as her cough burned her chest. The way she hugged Isla even without strength, and how she looked at Noah before closing her eyes for the last time. As if saying, "Take care of her for me." And he did. He was taking care. With what he had, with what he could, with what God allowed. His dad, that was a different story. He left with promises in his pockets and never came back. Noah kept trying to figure out if he disappeared out of weakness or choice. And that hurt just as much as the hunger. Noah looked up at the dark, cloud-filled sky and whispered without sound, "I'm trying, okay?" It wasn't a complaint. Just exhaustion. An 8-year-old boy, worn out from being an adult too soon. He still believed in God. Still believed faith was more than waiting for a miracle, it was acting even with no guarantees. But moments like that made him wonder, how far can someone go when all they want is to survive? And there, holding his sleeping sister, with the wind still relentless, he felt he had to choose whether to keep believing, or just keep existing. Noah stayed awake most of the night, even though he was exhausted. There was food, for the first time in days, but still something kept him on edge. The woman with the shawl. Who was she? Why had she appeared right there? And why had she vanished so fast? Deep down, he felt it wasn't just chance. Maybe it was one of those signs his mom said God sends when we're close to breaking. But along with that good feeling came something else, fear. He knew not every act of kindness was real. The streets teach you that early. Sometimes, trust can cost too much. At dawn, when the sky was barely light, she returned. Again, without a sound, with that same calm but steady look. "There's a warm place, if you want," she said. "Not far. There's soup, blankets, and no one will hurt you." Isla woke up immediately, curling into her brother's coat, still scared. Noah didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. Everything inside him screamed it could be a trap. But something in the way the woman spoke, slow, gentle, direct, made him want to believe. His heart wanted to trust. His head didn't. He thought about running. But Isla wouldn't survive another night like the last. And no matter how hard he tried to be everything for her, he was reaching his limit. He felt that quiet presence of faith again, like God saying, "Go, but go wisely." He took his sister's hand, looked into the woman's eyes, and asked, "Is it really safe?" She only nodded. Didn't make promises. Didn't say pretty words. And maybe that's what convinced him. Because sometimes, the simplest gestures are the ones that look most like Jesus. The walk to the place was silent. The woman led the way, and Noah followed with Isla in hand, eyes scanning every corner. The shelter wasn't big, an old house, adapted with mats, pots on the stove, and the smell of soup in the air. No luxury, but it felt like a miracle. A tall man welcomed them with a reserved, honest smile. Make yourselves at home. Tonight, you have a place to sleep. Noah looked at Isla, who squeezed his hand as if asking permission to rest. For the first time in a long while, they slept without fear of the streets. But peace didn't last. In the middle of the night, he heard whispers. Low voices, worried. When he opened his eyes, he saw the woman talking to another volunteer. She said something about a delicate case, the authorities, and necessary intervention. It chilled him to the bone. He knew exactly what that meant, social worker. He'd seen it before, other kids taken away. Separated. Put in cold shelters, without their siblings, without anyone. His instincts kicked in. He got up slowly, silently, and wrapped his arms around Isla like trying to hide her from the whole world. His mind was racing. Had trusting been a mistake? Had God really sent help, or was this just a test to see how much he could take? His heart was pounding. On one hand, he knew they needed help. On the other, he couldn't stand the thought of losing the only person who still called him brother. Isla was everything. He couldn't let her go. If they try to separate us, we run, he whispered, as he tucked a thin blanket around her. But inside, he prayed again. Jesus, if you're listening, show me what to do. Just don't let us get lost. The sun had barely risen when Noah got up, heart pounding. The house was still quiet, but he knew it wouldn't last. That assistant would be there soon. He stared at Isla sleeping, her messy hair falling over her face, her breathing soft. Part of him wanted to pick her up and run away, to disappear like he had before, until his legs gave out, until no one could find them again. But now there was food, a bed, people who didn't yell at them. The doubt squeezed his chest. Should they run, or dare to believe? The woman in the shawl appeared at the door, holding a warm cup in her hands. She didn't speak at first. Just looked at Noah, like she already knew what was going through his mind. You want to run, don't you? She asked, straight to the point. He hesitated, but didn't lie. I don't want them to take my sister. She nodded and slowly sat on the floor across from him. If I were in your shoes, I'd be scared too. But look at me, Noah, do you really think God brought you here just to take her away from you? He didn't answer. But something about that question broke something inside him. Because that's exactly what he'd been asking himself all along. After a long pause, she took a small bracelet off her wrist and handed it to him. This belonged to my daughter. Today she's safe, adopted by a good family, but we only got there because she had help. And because I trusted. You're not alone, Noah. And neither is your sister. He looked at the bracelet in his hand, simple, worn, but full of meaning. It didn't solve everything. But it changed something inside him. Maybe, just maybe, trusting was the last act of faith he still needed. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would stay. He would face whatever came next. But he would do it with open eyes, with courage, and with God in control. 2 days went by. No police. No separation. What came, instead, was a different social worker. She sat with Noah, looked him in the eye, and spoke with respect. She didn't try to tear Isla from his arms. She explained everything, slowly. Said she had heard about their situation from the woman in the shawl, whose name, he now learned, was Clara, and that there was a temporary shelter with space for siblings to stay together. No separation. No empty promises. A place to start over. For the first time, Noah didn't feel threatened. He felt seen. The following week, Noah and Isla were taken to this new home. An old two-story house, simple, filled with the smell of fresh food and the laughter of other children. Of course, he still looked around cautiously at first. The trauma from the streets doesn't vanish overnight. But Isla blossomed. She started laughing again. Playing. Sleeping without curling up. And that was all Noah had ever wanted. He still remembered their mother every day. Still whispered prayers before bed. But now, his prayers were filled more with gratitude than desperation. And those verses his mother used to read out loud came back to him, like echoes of a faith that had survived everything. A month later, Clara came back. This time, with news he never imagined he'd hear. A family wanted to adopt them, together. And not just any family. People who had lived through similar pain. Who knew what abandonment felt like, but also what it meant to start again. Noah cried, for the first time in a long while, without shame. He cried from relief. From surrender. From faith confirmed. The bracelet Clara gave him was still on his wrist, now a reminder that God, sometimes, answers through ordinary people. And that miracles don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes, they knock on your door. Now be honest with me. How many times have you looked away from someone on the street, thinking they were just another? And what if that someone was a child like Noah, holding his little sister tight, trying to shield her from the world? This story isn't just about hunger and cold. It's about what faith can do when everything seems lost. And about how God sometimes sends help through the most unexpected ways, like a woman in a shawl on the street, or like this video that found its way to you today. So tell me, what will you do with this? Will you just scroll past, or will you let this change something inside of you? If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell us what touched you the most. And of course, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs a dose of faith and humanity today. Because sometimes, a simple story can be the last coin that reignites someone's hope.